Welcome to the 199th Annual Convention of the General Convention. Do I need to repeat that? Welcome to the 199th Convention of the General Convention of the New Jerusalem. And it's wonderful to be back in this place. We've been here at least 4 times in the last 20 years. Love this auditorium room. It's special to be here again. And to put these gatherings together takes a tremendous amount of work. And I just want to start off by acknowledging my gratitude and all of our gratitude towards some of the frontline workers, especially the staff. Brittany Price of the central office. Becky Greenwood. Our new digital communications manager, Rudy Casares. Emily Taliaferra has done a lot of work helping on the team here. The members of the General Council have done a lot of work. Our treasurer, Jennifer Lindsay, our vice president, Kurt Feckety, who's with the youth right now, and our recording secretary, Karen Conger, does a lot of the planning and preparation for this. I want to thank them for all their support and good work. And, especially the local people who have done so much. The ministers, Pastor Kelly and Reverend Dr. Donna, who are leading the service tonight. Reverend Kevin Baxter has done a tremendous amount of work in this convention. Reverend Sage, who's going to be giving our keynote address. Many of the parishioners, the local folks, have done a tremendous amount of work to let us have this historic occasion. I thank them especially. So I want to begin a little address before we get to our worship service by sharing the opening 2 verses of the last chapter of the last book of the Bible, Revelation chapter 22, verses 1 and 2. Then the angel showed me the river of the water of life, bright as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb through the middle of the street of the city. Also, on the other side of the river, the tree of life was flowing with its 12 kinds of fruit, yielding its fruit each month. The leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. Every Swedenborgian denomination on the planet uses this verse as the foundational framework for the metaphor, analogies, and symbols of the church. There are at least 5 denominations that use the phrase New Jerusalem in their official incorporated language. And this final biblical image is a beatific image of perfection, wholeness, destination, a holy city finally descending from heaven to earth. 199 seems a little odd as a number, doesn't it, given the fact that we have already celebrated our bicentennial in 2017 in the Philadelphia area, where it all began for the new church in America. But years of wars and pandemics led to decisions over time to not hold an annual convention in a given year. And so we won't reach our actual bicentennial in terms of legal denominational gatherings until next year. We are gathering this date in something of an honor also of going back as early as the summer of 1784, when James Glenn, who was a British plantation owner, a slave owner as well, in Guyana, brought copies of Swedenborg's theological writings to Philadelphia and gave public lectures. Reading groups from these books, which he left behind after the lectures, led to led to groups growing and engaging the thought in those books. And some of those groups evolved into bigger circles and ultimately into churches with religious services and eventually with consecrated leadership. Though early on, the church in Baltimore had the most members of a single church, it was Philadelphia that remained ground zero for the first quarter century with the largest number of groups. The Quaker strength in Pennsylvania provided very useful sort of spiritual engagements for the nascent Swedenborgian movement, both movements sharing a lot of similarity in discussing the inner life. And both groups have been noted by religious historians to have been the biggest number coming into the early Swedenborgian movement, and both groups were very much noted by contemporary historians as kind of a spiritualist option in Reformation history. The first church building commissioned by Swedenborgians was in Philadelphia, and it opened on New Year's Day in 1817. It was modeled after the Nunc Licet Temple that's described in the last book Swedenborg wrote, True Christianity, talking about a vision he had of the most magnificent church. Unbelievable, and he described it this way. One day, a magnificent church building appeared to me. It was square in plan, with a roof like a crown, with arches above and a raised parapet running around it. Later, when I got closer, I saw a Latin inscription over the door. Now it is permitted. And it is shorthand, of course, for now it is permitted to enter with understanding into the mysteries of faith. In that same year, since many societies have been cropping up around the eastern seaboard, the idea was sprung to have a gathering together to pull all the groups together and talk about their similarities and how they might become connected with one another. And so they met on May 15, 1817, the day of Ascension in the Christian calendar, in the new Nunc Licet Temple. Their closing piece of business was to set a second annual meeting, also for the day of Ascension the next year, to be held then in the Baltimore church. And the denomination has continued to hold these annual conventions when we can ever since. A foremost challenge for the new movement that it faced in its first century was a lot of push and pull over how power flows in organizations. There was a lot of tangling around turf, and there was governmental sort of arguments that dominated the culture for a while. Convention had been functioning as this loose federation under a congregational form of polity, where local groups own and operate their own ministry. But there was a broad desire for more coordination and shared standards. And that led to the biggest crisis of the 19th century, because we haven't always just been one convention. There were, as these disagreements about the larger church grew, the leader in Boston, Reverend Thomas Worcester, who is the minister for 38 years at the Boston Church on Beacon Hill, tried to impose an Episcopal form of government, church government, upon this widely diffused gaggle of Swedenborgian congregations in what infamously became known as the squeezing rule. At the 22nd annual convention, Worcester engineered an edict requiring all societies to become organized according to a new rule of order by the following year or be dropped from the rolls of convention. Furor erupted. Resistance took two forms. In the Midwest, there was a rebellion against any kind of centralization. And in the mid-coast region on the east, there were anchored in the Philadelphia area, resistance rose up against Worcester personally. These two doings created breakaways and new conventions, one called the Western Convention and the other called the Central Convention. And they referred to the old General Convention as the Eastern Convention or the Boston Convention. It took decades for this to all settle down and shake out. But finally, there were enough aspects of governance shared by the Western Convention and the Eastern Convention that they banded back together in a congregational form of government, whereas the Central Convention did never rejoin, and it became part of the seedbed of what led to the breakaway movement into a new denomination late in the 19th century. So there are so many stories in this long history we have of the effort to be this new church in the right way, in an effective way, a way that it has power and value. And one core value that we all share deeply is the treasure of Swedenborg's writings that have led to millions of pages of discourse and countless numbers of enriched lives. It's now commonly touted that though Swedenborg has been largely ignored by organized Christianity, with very few serious theologians and writers of other traditions taking any study of Swedenborg very far. At the same time, Swedenborg stands at the top of theologians for being engaged by such a long list of celebrated artists and writers, novelists and poets, painters, sculptors, such that Swedenborg is now studied much more in arts culture than he is in seminaries outside of Swedenborgian seminaries. His reception in cultural history far outstrips the Martin Luthers, John Calvins, and John Wesleys in this way. And often religion historians remark that the Swedenborgian church has perhaps the most unexpected ratio of cultural recognition, which is considerable compared to its actual membership numbers, which is fairly negligible on a broad scale of comparisons. One of those famous figures in culture that have engaged Swedenborg deeply was Helen Keller, whom we celebrate at this convention. We selected Helen to feature because we wanted to raise up the new effort at a new Helen Keller Center at the Cambridge Church. The practice of optimism, which is the name of the theme of this convention, comes from one of her earliest books. She started it when she was still a college student at Radcliffe and finished it in her early 20s or her late 20s. And I'm forever grateful to Helen because she's the one who convinced my mother that I did not go off and join a cult, which others believed. If Helen Keller loved Swedenborg, it was the real deal. And over time, Mom collected quite a few Swedenborgian books and, of course, followed the work of our church with interest because I was hanging out there. And also, of course, the driving force behind the Helen Keller Center is Reverend Sage Cole, who gives our keynote address this evening. Ever since I've been in this church now for 4 decades, we've always wrestled with why we are not bigger. How could something so rich and so powerful, something that is so overwhelmingly meaningful for us, manifest in such seemingly small ways on the outside? Why don't more people see the new church vision that we see? But these, and by that I mean 2023, these are dynamic times. Religion and spirituality today very little resemble religion and spirituality in America half century ago. Every religion in America today laments the trends dragging their numbers down, while at the same time, new modes of spirituality that have often had small pop-up versions and manifestations have livelihoods that do not resemble the old-fashioned bricks and mortar churches. They keep appearing and touching people's lives in new ways. It's a dynamic world of a massive discourse communication happening every day on people's devices. I encourage us to believe in our future, to believe in our ability to meet the challenges of engaging questions of that matter to most people, and to believe in our calling to contribute effectively to the reality of the holy city, New Jerusalem, in our personal lives and in the world, who in all of its manifestations is always our neighbor and is always our ministry.